3 men were hunkered down by the fire when Jim Gary walked his buckskin up to their camp in the lee of the cliff. The big man across the fire had a shotgun laying beside him. It was the shotgun that made Gary uneasy, for cowhands do not carry shotguns, especially when on a trail drive, as these men obviously were. Early as it was, the cattle was already bedded down for the night in the meadow along the stream, and from their looks they had come far and fast. It was still light, but the clouds were low and swollen with rain. "How's for some coffee?" Jim asked as he drew up. "I'm riding through and I'm sure as hungry as and tuckered." Somewhere off in the mountains, thunder rolled and rumbled. The fire crackled and the leaves on the willows hung still in the lifeless air. There were 3 saddled horses nearby, and among the gear was an old Mother Hubbard-style saddle with a wide skirt. "Light and set up." The man who spoke was lean-jawed and sandy-haired. "Never liked to ride on an empty stomach myself." More than ever, Gary felt uneasy. Neither of the others spoke. All were tough-looking men, unshaven and dirty, but it was their hard-eyed suspicion that made Jim wonder. However, he swung down and loosened his saddle girth and then slipped a saddle off and laid it well back under the overhang of the cliff. As he did so, he glanced again at the old saddle that lay there. The overhang of the cliff was deep where the fire was built for shelter from the impending rain. Jim dropped to an ancient log, gray and stripped of bark, and handed his tin plate over to the man who reached for it. The cook slapped 2 thick slabs of beef on the plate and some frying pan bread deliberately touched with the beef fryings. Gary was hungry and he dove in without comment, and the small man filled his cup. "Headed west?" the sandy-haired man asked after a few minutes. "Yeah, headed down below the rim. Pleasant Valley way." The men all turned their heads toward him, but none spoke. Jim could feel their eyes on his tied-down guns. There was a sheep and cattle war in the valley. "They call me Red Slaggle. These hombres are Toby Langer and Jeter Dirksen. We're driving to Salt Creek." Langer will be the big one. "My name's Gary," Jim replied. "Jim Gary. I'm from Points Yonder, mostly Dodge and Santa Fe." "Here they're hiring warriors in Pleasant Valley." "Reckon." Jim refused to be drawn, although he had the feeling he had warmed to them since he mentioned heading for the valley. "Riding that away ourselves," Red suggested. "Want to make a few dollars driving cattle? We're short-handed." "It might," Gary admitted. "The grub's good. Give you 40 to drive to Salt Creek. We need help. From hereabouts the country is plumb rough and she's fixing the storm." "You've hired a hand. When do I start?" "Catch a couple hours sleep. Toby is the first ride, then take you over. If you need help, just call you out. Just you call out." Gary shook out his blankets and crawled into them. In the moment before his eyes closed, he remembered the cattle all worn in a double A brand, and the brands were fresh. That could easily be with the trail herd, but the double A had been the spread that Mark Gray had mentioned. It was raining when he rode out to the herd. "They ain't fussing," Langer advised, "and the rain's quiet enough. It should pass it mighty easy. See ya." He drifted toward the camp, and Gary turned up his slicker collar and studied the herd as well as he could in the darkness. They were lying quiet. He was riding a gray roped from the small remuda, and he let his horse amble placidly toward the far side of the meadow. 100 yards beyond the meadow, the bulk of the sloping hill that formed the opposite side of the valley showed blacker in the gloom. Occasionally there was a flash of heat lightning, but no thunder. Schlegel had taken him on because he needed hands, but none of them accepted him. He decided to sit tight in his saddle and see what developed. It could be plenty, unless he was mistaken, this was a stolen herd and Schlegel was a thief, as were the others. If this herd had come far and fast, he had come farther and faster, and with just as great as need. Just as great a need. Now there was nothing behind him but trouble, but nothing before him but bleak years of drifting ahead of a reputation. Up ahead was Mart Ray, and Ray was as much a friend as he had had. Gunslingers are admired by many, but respected by some, feared by all, and welcomed by none. His father had warned him what to expect, warned him long ago before he himself died in a gun battle. "You're right handy, son," he had warned, "one of the fastest I ever seen, so don't let it be known." Don't never draw a gun on a man in anger, and you'll live happy. Once you get the name of the gunfighter, you're on a lonesome trail, and there's only one ending. So he listened, and he avoided trouble. Mart Ray knew that. Ray himself was a gunman, and he had killed 6 others. He and Mart had been riding together in Texas, and then in a couple of trail drives, once all the way to Montana. He never really got close to Mart, but they had been partners after a fashion. Ray always had been amused at his eagerness to avoid trouble, although he had no idea of the cause of it. Well, he had said, "You sure can't say like father, like son. From all I hear, your pappy was an uncurried wolf, and you fight shy of trouble. You run from it. If I didn't know you so well, I'd say you was a yeller." But Mart Ray had known him well, for it had been Jim who had rode his horse down in front of a stampede to pick Ray off the ground, saving his life. They got free, but no more, and 1,000 head of cattle stampeded over the ground where Ray had stood. Then a month before, down in the Bend country, trouble had come. And it was trouble he could not avoid. It braced him in a little Mexican cantina just over the river, and in person of a dark cat-like Mexican with small feet and dainty hands. But his guns were big enough, and there was an unleashed devil in his eyes. Jim Gary had been dancing with a Mexican girl, and the Mexican had jerked her from his arms and struck her across the face. Jim knocked him down, and the Mexican got up, his eyes fiendish. Without a word, the Mexican went for his gun, and for a frozen, awful instant, Jim saw his future facing him. And then his own hand went down, and he palmed his gun in a flashing, lightning draw that rapped out 2 shots. The Mexican, who had reached first, barely got his gun clear before he was dead. He died on his feet and then fell. In a haze of powder smoke and anguish, Jim Gary had wheeled and strode from the door, and behind him lay a dead and awful silence. It was not until 2 days later that he knew who and what he had killed. The live-bodied Mexican had been Miguel Sonoma. And he had been a legend along the border, a tough, dangerous man with a reputation as a killer. 2 nights later, a band of outlaws from over the border rode down upon Gary's little spread to avenge their former leader, and 2 of them died in first blast of gunfire. A matter of handguns at point-blank range. From the shelter of his cabin, Gary fought them off for 3 days before the smoke from his burning barn attracted help. When the help arrived, Jim Garrett was a man with a name. 5 dead men lay on the ground around the ranch yard and in the desert nearby. The wounded had been carried away. And the following morning, Jim turned his ranch over to the bank to sell it and lit a shuck away from Texas. Of this, Mark Ray knew nothing. Half of Texas and all of New Mexico, or most of it, would lie behind him when Jim reached the banks of Salt Creek. And Mark Ray was ramrod in the double-A, and he would have a job for him. Jim Gary turned the horse and rode slowly back along the side of the herd. The cattle had been taking their midnight stretch, and after standing around for a bit, were lying down once more. The rain was falling, but softly, and Gary let the gray take his own time in skirting the herd. The night was pitch dark, only the horns of the cattle glistening with rain. And their bodies were dark blobs in the blackness of the night. Once drawing up near the willows along the stream, Jim thought he detected a vague sound. He waited a moment, listening. On such a night, nobody would be brought to who could help it, and it was unlikely that a mountain lion would be on the prowl, although possible. He started on again, and yet his now senses were alert, and his hand slid under his slicker and touched the butt of a 44. He was almost at the far end of the small herd when a sudden flash of lightning revealed the hillside across a narrow valley. Stark and clear, glistening with rain, sat a horseman. He was standing in the stirrups and seemed amazingly tall, and in the glare of the flash, his face was stark white, like the face of a fleshless skull. Startled, Gary grunted and slid his gun into his hand, but all was darkness again, and listened as he could. He could hear no further sound. When lightning flashed again, the hillside was empty and still. Uneasily, he caught himself staring back over his shoulder into the darkness, and watched his horse. The gray was standing up, head up and ears erect, staring off toward the darkness near the hill. Riding warily, Gary started in that direction, but when he got there, he found nothing. It was almost daylight when he rode up to the fire, with which he kept up through the night. And swinging down when he awakened Dirksen, the man sat up startled. "Hey!" he exclaimed. "You forget to call me?" Jim grinned at him. "Just figured I was already up and a good cook needed to sleep." Jeter stared at him. "You mean he rode for me? Say you're all right."